Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is the newly published graphic novel Adi Mahi. It's a really fascinating text, mostly because it just refuses to be put in a simple genre box. It follows the journey of Adi, who's a physicist, and Mahi, a geneticist, who get these incredible powers after a lab accident.
And they eventually form that vigilante team, SKYFIRE. It's a powerful piece of work. It blends this really intimate character drama with these huge, global scale implications.
Absolutely. And that blend forces us to ask a pretty crucial question. What genre most accurately defines Adi Mahi? I'm going to argue that, despite all the interpersonal weight, the core narrative drive places this squarely in the superhero action sci-fi thriller category.
And I'm going to argue the opposite, that the primary identity, where all the narrative energy is really focused, is on domestic drama and scientific realism. The powers are just the catalyst for that drama. They're not the point of the story.
I can respect that reading, I can, but I think it fundamentally misrepresents the book's actual trajectory. To call the domestic conflict the substance, that ignores the whole narrative arc that the genre demands. If you just look at the overall structure, this is a clear-cut superhero origin story. They gain powers by accident, and this immediately imposes a kind of destiny on them, the need to save the world. The central threat isn't their marriage. It's this external, almost monolithic antagonist, the Cabal, or the Supersetters, who want to patent gene-edited human beings and own them. That is a global existential conflict. And the material we have culminates in Chapter 7, with Adi and Mahi, now Falak and Vahani, engineering these high-tech identities, the Kinsu and Kinfa suits, and using them in very kinetic action sequences. Air jumps, channeling lightning to fix a power grid, confronting Cabal agents on the high seas. The relational stuff is the foundation, I'll give you that, but it's just the scaffolding to get them to their heroic purpose as the world's newest first responders.
See, I come at it from a completely different angle. For me, the real juice of this graphic novel, the engine that actually keeps you reading, isn't that external fight. Frankly, that fight often happens kind of abstractly, through text messages and bank transfers. The real story is the deep, sustained relational and psychological trauma that comes from the accident. The visual and narrative weight of the panels is almost entirely on their intimate disintegration. We spend so much more time exploring those 5 core conflicts, the loss of intimacy, the raw anxiety over loss of income, and that philosophical battle over the burden of legacy, the pressure to just give up and take safe family money. The powers aren't presented as power-ups. They're sources of profound psychological damage. Mahi, the geneticist, she treats their condition like a medical puzzle, not a gift. Her central demand, I can't diagnose your intuition. I need data. That's the whole struggle right there. It's clinical science versus extraordinary chaos. And that puts the story right in the realm of a relationship thriller, a character drama. And we really have to look at the immediacy of the threat. You point to the Cabal, but the threat of these supersetters is, it's a pretty distant, abstract idea for most of the early chapters. What's immediate? The fear that they might lose their house, the conflict over their daughter Marie's future, that deep fear of becoming a single parent. Mahi says it explicitly. I kept thinking about having to be a single parent to Marie. That very human fear of vulnerability, of just trying to survive, that's what dominates the page time. The external conflict with the bank accounts and code names like Taxi and Mr. Dunn, that feels more like a plot device to push them toward their next agonizing internal decision.
But every great action story does that. It uses deep personal stakes to raise the tension of the global stakes. The reason we care about Marie is because the Cabal exists. The Cabal's entire motivation is the systemic control and ownership of gene-edited humans. That is a philosophical, world-altering threat to autonomy. So the conflict immediately shifts from personal survival to an existential fight. If the story were truly a domestic drama, the resolution would be internal, right? They'd fix their intimacy issues, accept their financial situation, but the narrative pushes them outward. They go from being reluctant academics to proactive field operatives in a geopolitical showdown, disabling a drone sub, compromising a nation's sovereignty. That move, from the lab to a high-stakes maritime mission, that's the definitive genre pivot into thriller territory.
I just don't see it as a pivot. I see it as an extension of their trauma. Even their parents' support, which you frame as this necessary scaffolding for action, is defined in domestic terms. Saving the world is a family business. It's still filtered through this lens of family and generational duty. The explosion didn't immediately create superheroes. It created two highly damaged people who were just trying to hold on to some sense of normalcy. The conflict over losing their cushy research jobs is all over the early conversations because it establishes the cost of their new reality. They aren't defined by the enemies they fight. They're defined by the losses they sustain. They are human first, agent second.
But those sustained losses provide the emotional fuel for the triumph. If the domestic conflict was the primary focus, they'd spend dozens of panels in counseling or, trying to reverse the change. But they don't. The focus shifts pretty quickly to getting the gear, understanding the threat, and engineering solutions. The anxiety is only there so it can be overcome, so they can move forward with the mission. Look at the moment they accept the Kinsu and Kinfa suits. That's not just them getting new gear. It's the symbolic end of their resistance to this new path. It's a choice to externalize their fight.
But even how they externalize it is rooted in this kind of scientific introspection, which I think brings us right to the role of science in this text.
Exactly. Let's talk about the level of scientific detail, because this is where the sci-fi part of the equation really comes into play and separates it from standard domestic fare. We aren't just told they have powers, we're given the complex mechanics behind them. Things like line-act development, nanofusion theory, E=mc² applied to kinetic energy, radiation vision, biosonar, Mahi's high-concept genetic abilities, her ability to edit genes on the fly, and Audie's energy conversion skills are built on this really intricate foundation. This level of exposition is there to explain the mechanics of their abilities. It gives an internal logic that anchors the superhero action in high-concept science fiction. You just don't need all that complexity if the story's only about their marriage. It's there to make the extraordinary feel possible.
See, that's the crucial difference in how we're reading this. I see that scientific detail not as world building for a sci-fi spectacle, but as the source of the drama and the engine of realism. Mahi is a geneticist. She views these changes through the lens of a scientific procedural, not as some kind of gift. Her own body becomes an experimental subject. The methodical, almost clinical testing, that slow analysis of false positives like the fire incident or that painful, rubbery kiss, it all reflects a scientific, a medical approach to a personal catastrophe. When she starts seeing her own body as an algorithmic system, she's grappling with the core philosophical problem of the text. What do you lose when the self becomes non-human and quantifiable? That sense of alienation is just a powerful dramatic tool.
Okay, but that philosophical problem resolves itself into an application of extraordinary physics. The initial diagnosis of their powers, which you're calling procedural, it quickly leads to the discovery that the changes are because of nanoparticles and that each cell has a mind of their own, creating a distributed superintelligence. This isn't just medical trauma. This is a classic sci-fi trope, advanced nanotechnology fundamentally altering biology to create a superorganism. And that realization is the narrative justification for the Kinzo and Kinfa suits. They have to harness that superintelligence to fight the cabal. The science explains the action. It isn't the central conflict itself.
But the horror of that realization is what defines these moments. That distributed superintelligence is terrifying at first. It grounds the story not just in biological science, but in this subgenre of psychological thriller, the feeling that there's a foreign, machine-like intelligence living in their bodies. Their initial inability to trust Adi's intuition is rooted in this very academic scientific disagreement. Mahi, the geneticist, she needs reproducible data. Adi, the physicist, relies on the theoretical leaps the nanotech lets him make. They're basically fighting over the limits of science and their professional identities. That's a drama rooted in scientific realism, not just a backdrop for punching villains.
And that debate over intuition versus data serves to refine their powers, making them more effective in the field. It's an intellectual hurdle they have to clear before they can successfully channel lightning or pull off a high-altitude rescue. The scientific jargon, no matter how precise, ultimately serves the narrative need to create superheroes. It's world building that makes the action feel grounded and intelligent.
I just don't buy that the dramatic core is secondary.
We have to look at the moments with the highest emotional resonance, the genre-defining moments about trauma. When Mahi falls during the ice climb in Chapter 4, she feels this agonizing pain that she later realizes was entirely all in my head. This psychological distress born from the terror that she might leave Marie without a parent. That is the definition of deep character drama. Her thought, "I feel non-human and I don't trust myself." That might be the most defining line in the whole book. These moments of vulnerability and trauma get panel after panel of detailed focus. The authors are clearly prioritizing the internal cost over the external gain.
I agree. Those panels are powerful, but they're the lowest point right before the upward trajectory toward mastery and, well, triumph. The resolution of their deepest conflicts is achieved through adopting the heroic identity. Their final acceptance of their new lives is marked by them engineering their gear and naming their team SKYFIRE. That's a public commitment to the superhero role. And that identity leads them right into their first successful external mission, the Big Lap Rescue, where they show complete mastery. Phalok overpowers a gun, Vanny disables a drone sub. The trauma is channeled into capability. It confirms the action trajectory. The internal struggles provide the foundation for their external success.
But even the resolution of their most intimate crisis, that repeated failure of the silky layer defense mechanism, which is a symbol for their lost intimacy, that isn't tied to defeating the Cabal. The successful kiss and embrace in Chapter 5, it happens once they consciously override that psychological barrier, the inner voice that trips the circuit. They achieve intimacy by gaining self-control over their own damaged bodies, not by saving the world. They find salvation in each other, inside their relationship, not through their suits or their mission. They are scientists navigating a personal catastrophe.
A salvation they immediately apply to their larger mandate. The intimacy they regain gives them the stability they need to face a global network of supersetters. The power of the graphic novel is that it shows that real heroism requires both internal stability and external capability. But the overall arc, the trajectory, it's undeniably action-oriented. The entire narrative builds from individual fear to a collective mission. Their final purpose is excellence for the mankind.
That sounds more like an obligation that's been forced on them, not a natural conclusion. They have to confront the fact that they are now more machine-like and less a normal human. The entire emotional focus is on the profound human vulnerability in that transformation. The powers and the action that follows are just the consequence of a tragedy that redefined their personal lives. The genre is defined by the intimate cost of having these abilities, not by the celebration of using them.
Consequences that turn two brilliant scientists into the saviors of Sona Feroza. I mean, the journey starts with loss. Yes, but it immediately reorients toward fighting a global conspiracy with specialized tech. That is the engine of a sci-fi thriller. The story is about how two people rise to meet an external threat, using their unique abilities to triumph.
Well, I think the graphic novel really does defy simple categorization, but its strength is in that constant, unresolved tension between the advanced machine within us and the desperate need to remain still human. The detailed character study, the deep dive into their trauma, and the extensive relational stress, it all suggests the true genre is an intimate drama where the powers just serve as the biggest, most devastating catalyst for self-discovery and stress on their relationship. The scientific realism keeps the stakes ethical and intensely personal, not just kinetic.
The authors certainly managed to craft something that is both academically rigorous and viscerally thrilling. It forces us to acknowledge that in modern storytelling, that intersection of personal life, scientific ethics, and heroic destiny is getting more and more complex.
Indeed. And that complexity means the reader has to decide for themselves whether Aji Mashi is a story about a family that became heroes or about two scientists who were broken by power and are just trying to put themselves and their relationship back together. There's certainly much more to explore in this fascinating book.